In 1938, while the world's attention was fixed on Europe's growing tensions, another revolution was quietly taking shape in Detroit. It didn't roll on tank treads or glide on wings. It roared to life in the heart of America's industrial belt, where General Motors engineers were attempting something most thought impossible, building a lightweight diesel engine powerful enough to move trucks, tanks, and ships faster than ever before. They called it Detroit Diesel, and for half a century, those two words would become synonymous with American power. But behind the success story of thundering two-strokes and chrome badges lay a deeper truth, a rise fueled by wartime necessity, post-war prosperity, and sheer mechanical brilliance, followed by a slow, painful collapse that mirrored the decline of the American manufacturing empire itself. Detroit Diesel didn't just build engines, it built the soundtrack of 20th century America, the rhythmic bark of a 671, the sharp mechanical chatter of injectors, and the unmistakable whine of the Roots blower became the anthem of trucks, ships, and generators across the country. But it all started with one goal: make diesel work where gasoline couldn't. The idea came from Charles F. Kettering, head of GM's research division, and a man who believed diesel could be more than a slow, stationary power plant. Kettering and his engineers at General Motors Research Laboratory saw what few others did, that the efficiency of diesel could power America's growing transportation needs, if only someone could make it small, light, and fast enough. At the time, diesel was a marine and industrial technology. Locomotives and ships ran on huge, slow-turning monsters built by companies like Fairbanks Morse and Electromotive. But GM wanted something different, something compact enough for trucks and tanks, with parts simple enough to mass produce. The result was a family of engines that would change everything, the Series 71. Introduced in 1938, the 6-71 was an inline six-cylinder two-stroke diesel engine that delivered an unprecedented combination of power, reliability, and serviceability. It displaced 426 cubic inches and produced 165 horsepower at 1,800 RPM. Figures that sound modest today, but in its time, this was revolutionary. More importantly, it was compact, modular, and incredibly robust. Every major component could be replaced independently. The block, cylinder heads, and injectors were all standardized, meaning a mechanic could rebuild one with a simple tool set anywhere in the world. It was designed to be fixed in the field, not babied in a lab. That philosophy would define Detroit Diesel for decades. Then came the war. When the United States entered World War II, Detroit Diesel found itself at the center of a military production miracle. The same qualities that made the 671 reliable for trucks made it perfect for tanks, landing craft, and generators. Factories in Michigan switched to around-the-clock production. The GM Diesel division churned out engines that powered everything from Sherman tanks to PT boats. At the height of the war, Detroit Diesel was producing one engine every 3 minutes. The 671 and its smaller siblings, the 471 and 371, became the beating hearts of American mobility in every theater of war. And the soldiers loved them. The 671 would start in any weather, run on poor quality fuel, and keep going even with damage that would destroy a gasoline engine. When other engines quit, the Detroit kept howling. By 1945, Detroit Diesel had built over 1.4 million engines for military and industrial use. It was a staggering achievement, and it made the company a household name. When the war ended, GM's diesel division didn't fade away. It pivoted. America was rebuilding, expanding, modernizing. Diesel wasn't just for war anymore. It was for highways, farms, and factories. Post-war America was built on the back of Detroit diesel power. The Series 71, 110, and later 92 engines became the workhorses of the modern era. They powered freight trucks, city buses, fishing trawlers, combines, bulldozers, and standby generators. You could hear their distinctive two-stroke bark in every state and every industry. They were loud, smoky, and brutally efficient. Each power stroke fired every revolution, doubling the exhaust rhythm compared to 4 strokes. Combined with the characteristic roots blower, the engines had a sound like nothing else on Earth. Half mechanical symphony, half angry thunderstorm. The mechanics joked that if you cut one open, it would bleed 40-weight oil and Detroit pride. By the 1950s, the brand had become a legend. Truckers swore by them. Ship captains trusted them, and engineers around the world copied them. The Jimmy Diesels, as they were affectionately called, earned a reputation for being nearly indestructible. The 671 alone became one of the most mass-produced diesel engines in history. In buses, fire trucks, and tugboats, these engines outlived the vehicles they were built into. Detroit Diesel wasn't just a division of GM anymore. It was a symbol of American mechanical excellence. And it had one philosophy that made it unstoppable: simplicity through modular design. The company's 2-stroke architecture meant every engine shared components: pistons, liners, injectors, and blowers. The same cylinder design could be used in 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, or even 16-cylinder configurations. It was the Lego set of the diesel world. This modularity let Detroit Diesel dominate markets where serviceability mattered more than raw horsepower. On remote farms, oil rigs, and naval vessels, that meant everything. But with every great empire comes overconfidence. By the late 1960s, Detroit Diesel faced a problem. Its success had made it complacent. The world around it was changing. Trucking companies were demanding quieter, cleaner, and more fuel-efficient engines. Emission standards were tightening. And competitors like Cummins and Caterpillar were innovating fast, introducing advanced 4-stroke diesels that made Detroit's 2-strokes look dated. Inside GM, executives faced a choice: re-engineer their diesels from the ground up or double down on the 2-stroke platform that had served them for decades. They chose the latter, and for a while, it worked. The company launched the Series 92 in 1974, a scaled-up, more powerful evolution of the 71 series design. The 8V92 and 6V92 became popular in buses and vocational trucks, delivering up to 475 horsepower. They were loud, smoky, and unapologetically Detroit. But under the hood, the world had changed. Turbocharging, electronic fuel control, and high-pressure injection were redefining diesel performance. 4-strokes were becoming smoother, more efficient, and far cleaner. The Series 92, for all its brute strength, couldn't match that evolution. The 2-stroke design, once an advantage, was now a liability. And yet, the brand's cultural weight carried it forward. In the 1970s and 80s, Detroit Diesel was still everywhere, from Greyhound buses to fire trucks and standby generators. Mechanics loved their serviceability. Fleet operators loved their modularity. But the writing was on the wall. The emissions era was coming, and it would hit Detroit Diesel harder than anyone else. By 1980, the federal government had begun enforcing strict emissions and fuel efficiency standards on diesel engines. Detroit's old 2-strokes struggled to comply. The design that made them reliable also made them inherently dirty. The Uniflow scavenging system, with air entering through cylinder ports and exhaust leaving through poppet valves, simply couldn't burn fuel as cleanly as the emerging 4-stroke competition. Even with turbochargers and aftercoolers, the Series 92 emitted more particulates and consumed more fuel per horsepower than newer engines from Cummins or Caterpillar. The engineers knew it. They tried everything: new injectors, improved timing, even early electronic governors. But the 2-strokes physics couldn't be rewritten. By the mid-1980s, the Detroit legend was faltering. Truckers who had once sworn by the whine of a Jimmy were switching to Cummins N14s or Caterpillar 3406s. The industry was moving on, and GM's management didn't have the appetite for another full-scale redesign. For decades, Detroit Diesel had been the heart of GM's diesel operations, but it was becoming a financial liability. So in 1988, GM sold the struggling division to Penske Corporation, marking the end of an era. For the first time since 1938, Detroit Diesel wasn't a GM company. But Penske saw potential where others saw obsolescence. The company reorganized Detroit Diesel as Detroit Diesel Corporation, focusing on developing new four-stroke engines for the next generation of trucks and buses. It was a bold move, an attempt to reinvent a brand that had defined itself by its two-stroke identity. For Guise, result would become one of the most important engines in modern heavy-duty trucking, the Series 60. The Series 60 was more than just an engine. It was Detroit Diesel's redemption song. When it debuted in 1987, the industry didn't know what to expect. After all, Detroit had spent half a century perfecting the art of two-strokes. The Series 60 was a radical departure, a four-stroke, inline-six, electronically controlled engine that looked nothing like its ancestors. But it carried the same DNA: durability, simplicity, and an obsession with reliability. This was the moment Detroit Diesel stopped living in its past and started building its future. The Series 60 introduced a technology that would redefine diesel performance: the Detroit Diesel Electronic Control System, or DDEC. It was the first fully electronic diesel engine ever offered for on-highway trucks in North America. At a time when most competitors still relied on mechanical governors and cable linkages, Detroit Diesel gave operators digital precision. The DDEC allowed real-time fuel mapping, adaptive timing, and onboard diagnostics. It recorded data about engine performance, emissions, and driver behavior, features unheard of at the time. For fleet operators, it was a revelation. Suddenly, you could measure efficiency down to the tenth of a gallon and predict maintenance before failures happened. In an industry driven by uptime and fuel economy, that made the Series 60 unstoppable. By the early 1990s, the Series 60 had captured 1/3 of the North American heavy-duty truck market. Its combination of power, smoothness, and economy made it the engine of choice for long-haul fleets. For truckers who had grown up on loud, screaming two-strokes, the Series 60 felt refined, but still tough. It didn't just run, it worked intelligently. The new Detroit Diesel had proven it could evolve. Behind the success was the leadership of Roger Penske, the racing and logistics magnate who saw in Detroit Diesel something worth saving. He understood that the company's legacy wasn't its two-strokes or its sound. It was its reputation for engines that never quit. Under Penske's control, Detroit Diesel became leaner, faster, and more focused than it had been in decades. Factories modernized, engineering teams were given freedom, and most importantly, the company finally escaped the shadow of General Motors bureaucracy. The gamble paid off. Truck manufacturers like Freightliner, Kenworth, and Peterbilt began offering the Series 60 as their top-tier option. Its 12.7-liter configuration struck a perfect balance between torque and fuel efficiency. By 1995, the Series 60 had become the best-selling heavy-duty diesel engine in North America. For a brief, shining moment, Detroit Diesel was on top again, but the forces that had driven its earlier decline hadn't disappeared. The 1990s brought a new wave of regulations: tighter emissions standards, noise restrictions, and environmental scrutiny. Electronic control had given Detroit Diesel a head start, but the complexity of future compliance would require resources even larger than Penske could provide alone. In 2000, Daimler Chrysler acquired Detroit Diesel, integrating it into its global network of powertrain companies. On paper, it made sense: access to global R&D, economies of scale, and the financial muscle to meet ever-tougher regulations. But for many inside Detroit Diesel, it marked the beginning of another identity crisis. Under Daimler, Detroit Diesel became part of a much larger machine. The name remained, the engines still rolled out of the same factory, but the culture that had once made the company unique began to fade. The product lines aligned with Mercedes-Benz and Freightliner powertrains. The Series 60 was gradually phased out, replaced by the DD13, DD15, and DD16 engines. Efficient, quiet, globalized machines built to serve fleets across continents. They were good engines, sophisticated, fuel-efficient, and compliant with every environmental law on the books. But they weren't Detroit Diesels. Not in the way old-timers meant it. The howl was gone. The mechanical simplicity was gone. And with it, something else. A connection to the machines that once defined American industry. The two-stroke era had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet whisper of modern engineering. Yet even as the company moved into the future, the past refused to die. Across the world, old Detroit diesels continued to work, decades after their official production ended. In shipyards, tugboats, and fire trucks, the Series 71 and 92 still roar to life every morning, their superchargers whining in defiance of obsolescence. Mechanics who once trained on them now rebuild them from memory. Parts are still cast, rebuilt, and sold by small shops that keep these legends alive. And on YouTube, the sound of a cold-starting 671 draws hundreds of thousands of views, proof that nostalgia has horsepower. What makes Detroit Diesel's story so remarkable isn't just its engineering, but its symbolism. The company's rise paralleled America's own ascent, from the wartime foundries of the 1940s to the industrial might of the 1960s, and its decline mirrored the globalization and consolidation of the 2000s. Detroit Diesel's fate was never just about engines. It was about what happens when innovation meets complacency, when craftsmanship meets economics, and when a sound becomes a legacy, because the story of Detroit Diesel is the story of American industry itself. Bold, ingenious, imperfect, and unforgettable. The early years were defined by invention, the mid-century by domination, the later years by reinvention and survival. Few companies in history have lived so many lives in one lifetime. The Detroit Diesel two-stroke taught the world what was possible when you combined simplicity with precision. The Series 60 proved that even an old brand could lead a technological revolution, and the modern Detroit brand, under Daimler's global reach, ensures that the name, at least, will never disappear. But if you ask anyone who ever drove, repaired, or lived alongside those engines, they'll tell you, the true Detroit Diesel spirit lives in the sound of a two-stroke firing on every revolution, a mechanical rhythm that refuses to be forgotten. That sound meant more than power. It meant resilience. It meant that no matter how many times the world changed, someone, somewhere, could still turn a wrench, hit the starter, and hear a Detroit come back to life. From the tanks of World War II to the trucks that hauled America's economy, Detroit Diesel powered generations. And though the company may have evolved into something quieter, cleaner, and more global, its legend remains untouchable. Even now, on some forgotten stretch of highway or rusting dockside, a faded green block still hums beneath layers of grease and history. Its paint chipped, its parts mismatched, but still running. Because that's what Detroits do. They don't quit. They don't surrender. They just keep working. And in that persistence, that relentless mechanical heartbeat, lies the spirit of America's greatest engine company.